And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the African Mining Indaba 2025. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show this evening. I'm Stephen Grootes. An astonishing story. We'll speak to Sikonathi Mantshantsha about it in just a moment. Around the Public Investment Corporation and a 100 million rand loan they gave to a company. A month later, that company is in business rescue. Kind of scratching my head about how something like this could happen. Gets to the bottom, I suppose, of lending practices. And the PIC, frankly, is supposed to be better than this and generally speaking has been. Most of its bets have paid off. We'll find out a bit more about it in just a moment. About 40 minutes from now, we'll speak to the CEO of the company, it's Broll, that are selling Ponte. And you know, for my family, based in Joburg, obviously, whenever we've been away from Joburg, as you come back into Joburg, there's a little bit of a competition. Who can see this tower first? Who can see that tower first? Who can see Ponte? It's kind of when you know you're nearly home. It's the first sign. That's how big Ponte is. It's a major, major landmark. I was thinking about the economics, the maths, your budget of living in Ponte, because it's one of those places where all of your services can actually be done inside. There's a sort of shopping centre, I understand. We'll hear more about it. You can get your dry cleaning done, or you used to be able to. I wonder if you live in a complex. Steyn City, I'm sure, is like that. I don't think I've been in Steyn City for ages. I'm told the queue for visitors to get in can be quite phenomenal at times. But I wonder about what that actually is like when you live in a place and you do everything in that place. You do your shopping, you do your dry cleaning, whatever it is. What's that like? You go to the restaurant there, your kids go to the school there. I mean, does that actually work out? Do you find that you spend less money because you're not going out? Do you find you spend more money because everything's just at your doorstep? You can go for a quick walk or a cycle ride or whatever it is, Segway, and find yourself actually sort of there, and able to spend money. I'd be intrigued to hear from you what that's like on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. The Auditor General's been talking this week, and they did a big investigation into the Eskom prepaid electricity system. And they've been looking at what seemed to be the creation of fake tokens, and in fact, some evidence of corruption in some way, shape, or form in the system within Eskom that creates them. And I keep coming back to the same thing, that the whole tariff system just isn't working. And just at my own example, for various reasons, we're on prepaid electricity in Joburg. We have to pay the 200 Rand network fee. And you pay it whether you're paying 300 Rand or, 2,000 Rand. It makes no sense to me. I can't help but feel that system isn't working either. I think we need a big rethink about electricity tariffs. Your experience, please, of, paying for prepaid electricity, how have you found that? And then also living in a complex like Ponte, where you do everything where you live. What's that like? Good to hear from you this evening.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
But we start with that astonishing story. The Public Investment Corporation laying criminal charges after a company it lent money to went into business rescue. News 24 reporting the PIC paid out this loan, 100 million rand, to a company called Enable Capital, or one of its entities is Enable Capital Receivables Finance. A month later, that firm's in business rescue. A person called Ruben Olifant now appears to face fraud and corruption charges. Sikonathi Mantshantsha is a writer at large at News 24. Sikonathi, good evening. What was this company supposed to be doing? Why did the PIC decide to lend this particular company so much money?
Good evening, Stephen and 702 listeners. The company's business is invoice discounting. That means if you are a subcontractor and working on someone's project, you've done the job, they buy the invoice from you, or they take the invoice and pay you some of the money or most of the money, and then Enable Capital goes to the major contractor to claim the rest of to claim the whole invoice, and they would. So it's a business to help ease the cash flow of small and medium enterprises. That's what their business. And the PIC said it had done a due diligence on them and approved a loan facility of 200 million rands back in 2023, late 2023, but then only afforded them half 100 million rands, which is half the facility, during the first tranche and then the money went missing, it would appear.
So I can understand from the PIC's point of view, it tries to use some of its money as a kind of lever to help grow the economy. This is a business that's helping small businesses. I mean, it's making money out of doing it, but it's helping small businesses manage cash flow. But you would think then that they'll be following the company quite closely. Must have been a nasty shock to see it in business rescue.
Absolutely, Stephen. Remember now, the PIC's 100 million rands is only a part of the funds of the monies that have been lost by other big asset managers who we have not yet named, because we've given them an opportunity to comment for a new story we'll write. There's about 700 million rands that has gone missing. Money that has been loaned by these institutions, including that 100 million rands from the PIC. How nobody thought they should keep a close eye on that kind of money, I have not a clue. Of course, no one is eager to talk about it amongst all of those companies, including the PIC.
I mean, it would seem the money's then disappeared, and I suppose the person that people are looking for is a man called Ruben Oliphant. What do we know about him?
Stephen, Ruben Oliphant is a serial register of companies on the CIPC. He seems to just create companies and then let them get deregistered by the CIPC. He's registered at least 153 companies, and about 140 of those are still active. He's a director in those companies. What exactly he does, I have no clue, other than what I described earlier in Enable Capital. He has got some other businesses such as Best Steel Group, and he's a member of prominent organizations such as the Chamber of Commerce in the capital city, that is Pretoria. What he does, I have not a clue exactly, other than registering companies, and it would seem in the case of Enable Capital, collecting very large sums of money, and we see what has happened to it.
So I can understand how sort of asset managers, investors, people who invested money in this in the private sector would be very angry if they lost money, but it's kind of their money. The PIC, we would expect to be a little more careful because it's other people's money, and we also saw what happened, I think, during the IO case, for example. I mean, I'm kind of surprised to see they've clearly lost so much money quite so easily almost.
Stephen, all of those asset managers that have lost money is other people's money. It's your money that's invested in pension funds, and it's my money that's invested in pension funds. It's everybody's money. In the case of the PIC, it is the assets, the pensions of state employees through the government employees' pension funds. And there are other local governments that are exposed to this, whose asset managers have actually loaned the money. We will be publishing a piece soon on News 24 naming all those organizations. To the extent we can, we will also be revealing the amounts they have lost in what does look to be a scam. Because there are three court cases that have been registered, or police investigations that have been registered with this. But about 700 million rands of your money, of my money, of everybody's money that does have some savings put away in an asset manager. They have been exposed to this, and we have not a clue yet what happened to the money. The business rescue practitioner and the PIC, they said they have started a forensic investigation.
Sikonathi Mantshantsha, thanks very much indeed. Writer at large at News 24. Fascinating story.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, a report out from Discovery Invest today suggesting that while the global economy is recovering, is due to grow this year and grow relatively strongly, the traditional way of investing may need to change. And that's because of what I suppose you could call the unusual environment. The company also looking at the US, saying despite the fact the US and tech stocks in particular have had intense growth, they expect more growth to come. Kenny Rabson is the CEO at Discovery Invest. Kenny, good evening. You say the traditional investment paradigm may need to be reconsidered. We are dealing with really a very unusual situation at the moment.
Hi, Stephen. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all come back from December holidays to a bit of a bumpy ride. And yes, I mean, we're in an environment of kind of shifting headlines every day, political uncertainty, market volatility, obviously on the back of all of that. A Trump administration, which I think is like keeping us all pretty focused day to day. So I guess, the thought that needs to be in everyone's mind is how do you navigate all of this and still come out on the right side of this. Our view is that at the end of the day, you still need to focus on the long term. You need to focus on value. And you need to rely on active managers that have got all the capabilities globally to be able to kind of navigate an environment that's moving very quickly. As an example, we just saw today, for example, the US CPI rate going up. Some might have expected it, many probably didn't. But certainly it endorses very sort of cautious approach of the Fed in terms of easing interest rates, and of tariffs may increase inflation in the US. In fact, you might even find interest rates going up again at some point. So I think, yes, I mean, we do have to think a little bit differently. We do need to make sure that the right skill sets are in place to be able to navigate this kind of volatile environment.
We've seen the US giving really strong returns. I mean, much stronger returns over the last few years than the rest of the world. Do you expect that to continue despite all of what I would sort of expect now, which is, social discord? Let me use that phrase in the United States. Do you still expect strong growth there?
No, Stephen, I think, we do expect that. Obviously, all the analysis we've seen from the partners, the asset management partners we have, be it 91, be it BlackRock, the S&P 500 delivered around 25% last year. And the MSCI, if you exclude the US, only gave about 5.2%. So certainly the US has dominated in terms of equities, but very much corporate earnings have been dramatically stronger in the US. So my gut feel is portfolios will still have a strong tilt to the US over 2025, even though I think there are probably, undervalued stocks available in the UK and the rest of Europe and South Africa for that matter. I still think there'll be a kind of a overweighting towards the US, but maybe not in the top 7, those sort of mega tech stocks. Maybe that will be kind of tapered down a bit.
It's quite tempting to sort of be quite conservative, put your money into gold. I mean, people clearly are doing that. You would resist the temptation to be too conservative at this stage? I mean, what approach would you recommend then?
Yeah, I think, Stephen, it depends what your investing goal is. Typically, if it's a long-term goal, typically for retirement, I think you have to think about long-term investing. In South Africa and globally, we've seen a lot of money sitting in cash on the sidelines waiting to go into the markets. Our unit trust stats over the last couple of years show that the income funds took the major flows. But of course, by doing that, people have missed out on the strong equity markets in 2024 if they didn't rotate into them. We still think that, over the long term, equities will outperform cash. So with interest rates coming down globally, you're earning less in conservative investments. By the time you pay tax on interest, you're getting even less. So I think the rotation into equities is inevitable on a global basis. It is true that gold, of course, being a safe haven type of asset, has hit all-time highs, and that'll probably continue for a while. But of course, investors in gold need to understand it's very volatile. Commodities are very volatile, and they can come down as quickly as they've gone up. So, yes, our advice would be over the long term not to be overly conservative because, you will battle to kind of meet your retirement goals. If you're trying to achieve inflation plus 5 to 7% over the long term, you're not going to do that sitting in conservative investments.
Sure. Kenny Rabson, thanks very much indeed. CEO at Discovery Invest.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Chris Stewart is Portfolio Manager at 91. Chris, good evening. Just after trading closed on the JSE today, an update from Northern Platinum. Their earnings down significantly, I suppose, no surprise.
Yeah, Good evening, Stephen. Another tough trading update from a platinum mining company. If you look at the bottom line guiding for headline earnings per share in the midpoint of their guidance range, somewhere around 61 cents per share for the first 6 months of the financial year. And if you look at what consensus is looking for in the market for the full year to June of this year, R8.61. So if they've done 61 cents in the first half, they've got another R8 to do in the second half to meet consensus expectations. So it's looking pretty stretched at this stage. Sales revenue down 3%. That's really a function of modest production increases, but at the same time, just over 3% decrease in the Rand PGM basket price over the period. So that's depressed sales revenue. You've got unit costs climbing by nearly 8% over the period. We know what's happened to mining inflation over the period. They've also had lower refined volumes of metal produced, and that's due to taking one of their furnaces offline for a rebuild that was anticipated. It also has resulted in an increase in inventories. They should be able to sell down those inventories in the second half, which would boost second half revenues. But nonetheless, it does look like there's an awful long way to go in order to get anywhere near what the market's looking for the full year. And that's still with no discernible help from the Rand basket price in the sort of 6 months that we've seen in the second half of their financial year. 6 weeks, I beg your pardon.
Sure. And then US inflation, 3% today, was expecting 2.9%. That's annually in the last month. The market not liking that at all, and obviously goes into interest rate expectations after Jerome Powell yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. Not liking it much. I mean, we saw some fairly hawkish commentary from Jerome Powell yesterday that saw, a little bit of a sell-off in risk assets. It saw a little bit of strength in the dollar, saw a little bit of impact on the bond markets as well. So, some hawkish comments yesterday. No particular urgency to cut rates further right now, and I guess a slightly unhelpful inflation print will probably cement that case for now, with I think the US only really discounting another 125 basis point cut for the balance of this year.
Chris Stewart, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio manager at 91.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Still keen to hear your experiences of living in a place where you live, work, do your laundry, everything in the same place. We'll talk about Ponte up for sale in a few moments, but just what that experience is like. Do you find that all of your money stays in one place? You're only spending money in one place? Do you find you spend more money because it's just so easy to sort of walk outside the front door, stay in the building and spend money? Or do you find actually, because you don't go out quite so much, you spend a little bit less? And it might well depend on which life stage you're at. But very interested to hear about that from you on 011 8830 702 and 021 4460 567. Still more reporting around the SA Rugby Union. Looks like they're making a little bit of progress in their bid to try and get more revenue, more money for SA Rugby. And of course, the Springboks are a big part of that. You remember last year, the Ackley deal, an American company was going to own some of the commercial rights to the Springboks, voted down in the end. Then another deal put on the table by some of the bigger unions. Now it looks like SARU is making another plan. Craig Ray is a sports editor at Daily Maverick. They broke that story. Craig, good morning. What kind of option is SARU looking at now to try and get more revenue?
Hi, Stephen. So they've basically accelerated some of their commercial plans. They did have these plans in place anyway as part of their future sort of earnings forecast. But when the equity deal fell flat with Ackley and the Rainbow Consortium, which includes the Bulls, Stormers and Sharks, put forward another bid which looked almost identical to the Ackley bid, SARU had another plan, and that was to tap into some commercial revenue, fan parks being one of them. They've sold the licensing to that now, to a big sponsor, an existing South African rugby sponsor, but for several $100 million. And they're also going to tap into other commercial pathways. They still got a few options. There's looking at the e-commerce stuff, looking at their data-driven monetizing their social media, and also looking at the shorts, training gear. If you think the All Blacks, who's currently in a dispute with Ineos, the All Blacks have different sponsors on their actual test match jersey as opposed to their training jersey. And so South African Rugby is looking at all of those. But what it did, long story short, is they managed to come up with a couple of $100 million in funding, and that was able to ensure that their union, their member unions, would be financially, at least financially, as well off as they were before. And that means they grade their sort of funding model to the unions as gold, silver, and bronze. Bronze being obviously the worst option. And they did warn when the Ackley deal fell through that they might be looking at a bronze option till 2027. But having come up with this new commercial bill, having sold the fan park licensing to a big sponsor, they've gone back to the gold option. And that means the equity deal that was proposed by Rainbow was voted off by the union member, by the General Council, which is the unions.
I mean, I get the vibe of a fan park, and if you can't actually go to the game itself, it's the next best thing. You're with lots of other people, you're all shouting and screaming the same anthem, etc., etc., etc. It's a lot of fun. I'm slightly surprised you can get hundreds of millions of rand for the sponsorship because they're fan parks already. And I mean, I can just imagine the legal argument. I mean, if you have 50 people to your house, you know, is that a fan park? What about 100 people? What if you charge them entrance because it's 200? I mean, it can get a bit silly. Then I suppose there's certain things you could do. You could have, members of the Springbok squad who aren't playing come to a certain fan park and, watch it with, or you can have former Springbok players watch it with. But still, hundreds of millions of rand?
Yeah, I mean, it does sound a bit fanciful, but remember, this is not just going to be one fan park. It's going to be dozens in different centres. So there's, it's a numbers game. And then it's also going to be all over the world as well. So you could have a fan park in London. And the idea, and I think what they sold it on, was that the Springbok brand has never been stronger. The Springbok emblem and the Springbok team has never been more well-liked in most places. I know we could argue that maybe in France and England they don't love us as much. But generally speaking, and then you must remember there's other things coming online. So the greatest rivalry, the All Black series coming in 2026, where we're going back to full tours and a full 3-test series plus 5 midweek games is coming online. And so these fan parks are sold around the promise of what that brings as well.
The other plan, you were talking about another plan from 3 of the big unions. What was that proposal? I mean, it's the kind of thing that might come back now that the idea is in the water.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the equity deal, so what's happened? This has enabled SARA to buy a little bit of time. They are now going to appoint an independent financial institution who will do a full assessment of basically the ecosystem, the financial state of the rugby ecosystem, and come back and say, all right, your best option going forward if you want to raise capital is through equity, or your best option is to sell a stake in the Springboks to a private sponsor. So we don't know what the answer to that's going to be, but there's going to be a full independent investigation into that. So the problem with the equity deal is that originally, the Ackley deal, all the unions that objected, and the Sharks, Bulls, Stormers being the biggest ones, said it wasn't a good deal, which, fine, fair enough, and it went to vote, and the member unions voted against it. But then the Rainbow Capital, or Rainbow Consortium, came back with a deal that looked almost identical to the Ackley deal. They offered a minimum of 75 million with the first payment of $37.5 million, which was exactly the Ackley structure as well. So from what they said was not a good deal, they then offered more or less the same. So it didn't really make sense to the unions. But had there not been an alternative, which is what SARA has come up with, they would have had to go with the Rainbow Consortium deal. So what it's done is bought a bit more time, and it's given everyone a little bit of chance to take a breath. The finances are going to be strong for the next 2 years, and we can now look at what's the best way forward and plot it forward. And I know one of the questions people have asked, well, why didn't they just go this commercial fan park licensing agreement in the first place? I mean, and that is a fair question. But when they were deciding on how to raise more funds for SARU, there were several options on the table, and the General Council decided that pursuing equity was the way to go, which duly happened. They came back with an offer. That all took a year or 18 months, and that offer was rejected. So this was sort of plan B, and they've gone to it.
What's slightly surprising to me is that this isn't happening in a vacuum. There are ways to make money out of sport. I mean, look at the Premier League in the UK. Look at all of American sport. As much as I dislike the idea of trading players sort of mid-season and the way they do things, there are ways to do it. And I realize that rugby is sometimes seen as a conservative sport, Craig. I don't know where that comes from, but it is kind of amazing that we're at this point and neither us nor the All Blacks nor Australia, they're pretty good with money, aren't they, have come up with a sort of system that works and makes deal out of a brand as big as the Springboks or the All Blacks and does it consistently.
Yeah, it's rugby's sort of conundrum, isn't it? Because I suppose the weakness for rugby lies, Stephen, in the fact that its most highly valuable assets are national teams, right? The All Blacks, the Springboks, England, Wallabies. And that comes with a lot of innate support. You're a South African, you support the Springboks. So commercializing that is difficult because you can't suddenly go and sell 1 million Springbok jerseys in Wales and or the United Kingdom because those people support England. You know, they're not clubs that transcend national borders. And I think that is maybe rugby's, it's its strength in a way because that's what makes it keeps the test match level, the international game at the pinnacle. But commercially, you're not going to turn an Englishman into a Springbok supporter and vice versa. So it makes it hard to commercialize it across a broad spectrum, whereas if you're Liverpool or Manchester United or the Philadelphia Eagles who have just won Super Bowl, you can commercialize that anywhere in the world because someone in Japan might decide they want to support the Philadelphia Eagles, but you're not likely to find an Englishman who's going to support the Springboks.
Sure. I mean, I don't think you can sell a Welsh rugby jersey in Wales at the moment either. Craig Gray, thank you very much indeed. Sports editor at Daily Maverick.
702.
702.
Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, if you're coming by car, one of the ways you know that you're very near Joburg is because you see the Ponte Tower. It is unmissable. Yes, there are other towers near it. Yes, they're a bit higher, some of them. But there's something about Ponte that is just unmissable and for various reasons become a big landmark. It's very unusual. It's described sometimes as sort of an example of brutalist architecture. It's been there for a while. 1975 it was built. Often advertising on the top, which sort of lights up the sky around it. All sorts of reasons to think that this is quite a valuable piece of property. Had its ups and downs over the years, of course. There was famously a time when the rubbish in the middle of it was several stories high. Ugh. Seems to be doing a little better nowadays. Now it's up for sale. And if you're looking for a big penthouse in the middle of Joburg, quite close to some of the amenities, you could probably do a lot worse than staying there. Norman Raad is the CEO at Broll Auctions and Sales. They've been tasked with selling Ponte. Norman, good evening to you. What kind of state is Ponte in nowadays?
Good evening, Stephen. Listen, the Ponte is in a very, very, very good state. It's been turned around from when it was hijacked, and that centre part was multiple stories high in dirt and rubble. It took them years to clear out, but it's absolutely turned around. I mean, it's in a very, very good condition. We had a walkthrough with the press and the media this week, and they were all pleasantly surprised. I mean, they couldn't believe what that believed it would be like and to what it was like. So there's CCTV, there's security, there's parking, the lifts are all working, there's generators. So it's a fully functioning high-rise building in the middle of Berea, and it's absolutely perfect.
What would you actually be buying? So most of it is flats, right? What else is there?
So there's about 2,500 square meters of retail. They've got restaurants, they've got shops that service the building. They've got a little primary school that services the children in the building. Then you've got all the just under 500 units there made up of bachelors, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and some penthouses. There's a bar in the building. So you're basically buying all the rentable income from that's generated from the building. It's about 30,000 square meters in total of GLA, and it's been turned around. You know, it's a completely different building to where it was many years ago. And I myself believed for a long time that Ponte had been hijacked, and it was still hijacked. And over the years, they've done a tremendous job, the current owners, and I think it's time that they're selling is I'm surprised, but there's nothing wrong with it.
Are most of the flats actually occupied? I mean, is there a high tenancy rate at the moment, a high occupation rate rather?
So it's about 75% occupied at the moment. The reason being is, they're very selective of the tenants that go in there now. Not just anyone. You need to qualify. You need to have certain merits to get into there, to rent from the landlord. And I think that's good for the building. You're not just going to put anyone in there and have multiple people renting in one unit. So it's good.
There used to be, you talk about the penthouse. I mean, I remember reading years ago that actually a penthouse was pretty much a whole floor. I mean, are those quite big apartments, some of them?
Yes, a couple of 100 square meters in size, and they've got the most magnificent views, and they're quite extraordinary. I mean, they basically, you can see from throughout, from Sandton all the way to the airport. I mean, it's all the way to the West Rand. I mean, there's nothing obstructing your views. It's the highest building, and was a long period of time the highest building in Africa.
And what's in the middle nowadays, Norman? I mean, what is there now?
There's still a rock. There's still a big rock there, and it's clean, and there's nothing there. And they haven't changed anything in the middle, So I think anyone, you can have a tour. You can go on a tour through Ponte. You can go on a tour when you go and visit. And you want to know more about Joburg. That's where the tourist guides' offices are, and they can take you through there. You can have viewings, you can have bites on the top floor. So it's quite extraordinary, and it's completely different to what the perception of was in the market.
At the moment, would it have to stay residential? I mean, no one's thought about turning that into office space. And I suppose there's not that much demand for office space, and probably in the centre of Joburg, a lot more demand for residential space. I'm surprised you asked that question, but yes, I don't think there is any demand for office space at the moment, and I think given the current commercial market. But I can tell you what we believe it's going to be used for. I think it's going to be broken up into possibly micro units for student accommodation, possibly. That's a good option because, nowadays everyone is going for these smaller dwellings, smaller units, and it's well positioned for that kind of use for the student accommodation or the micro unit. So you can definitely break up the units because they're substantially larger than the properties or the apartments that are being built today, but most certainly won't be converted to commercial offices. Norman Raad, thanks very much indeed. CEO at Broll Auctions and Sales. And you can sort of, if you're interested in Ponte, you heard what he had to say about it. I am very interested for you in what the experience of living in that kind of communal way is. And I'm not just talking about your average kind of complex that you get in most cities in South Africa. I'm talking about some of these fully serviced apartments that you see. You have a dormant, it's like something you see in the United States, isn't it? Sort of immediately think of New York. But there is that experience, I understand, available in South Africa. You can look for places in Sandton or places where you can sort of live, work and play, goes the advert, in sort of Joburg, in Cape Town. And I just wonder what that experience is like. Does it actually live up to what you expect? Do you get a bit kind of tired of it? Are there moments when actually you feel you do need to actually leave the space just for a bit? You get, there's a phrase for it, cabin fever, where you find yourself just feeling a bit sort of confined. And cabin fever, I think, actually comes from spending too much time on a ship. I think that's where the origins of it are in the English language. We'll be very interested to hear from you on 011 8830 702 and 021 4460567. Voice notes as well this evening on 072 702 1702. From time to time, you'll hear a story of someone who had started a career, was doing something interesting, rewarding, making money out of it, and they chucked it all in to go and do something completely different. Well, in about half an hour from now, you'll hear one of those stories. Someone who was doing quite nicely, actually, in our international relations department as an analyst, and now does something that simply could not be more different. You'll hear more from her and her story in a little while. You're with The Money Show at 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the African Mining Indaba 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of the show. I'm Stephen Grootes. A lot to come. Talk about how to tune out the noise in just a moment. And there's been so much noise, and there is still a lot more noise, I think, to come in the investing environment. And one of the problems with trying to do this is you can't actually just tune out the noise. You've got to know what to tune out and what not to tune out, what you need to actually pay attention to. And that's where things start to get very difficult, I think. And that's one of the conversations that we'll be having. I don't know if you, maybe someone you work with, maybe someone at a company you work with has had this happen where people phone you and sort of, you know, you agree kind of half-heartedly to buy a liter of cleaner of some kind. And suddenly they claim that you actually now owe them a fortune because you've bought, you know, thousands of liters of the stuff. Wendy Nola's been looking at that. And it does seem that this is becoming a major problem. And in fact, you might find for some people very distressing because what happens is their boss blames them and says, you are the person who did this, you must pay for it, or I'm going to fire you, whatever. And you can imagine the stress that that causes. Anyway, she'll look at that as well. I think that's very important. And then the story of someone who chucked it all in and went to go and do something completely different. Makari Mabela is her name. The company she has founded, it's Native Norsi. That name may give something about what she's doing now away. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Have you ever thought about chucking it all in? What would you go and do? Run a fan park for the Springboks?
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
Well, I'm pretty sure you've noticed how much noise there is around at the moment. I mean, I've noticed pretty much most days, the first half hour of this radio show has been around the US President Donald Trump. And that's not the only noise around. There are various transitions going on. We're moving away from fossil fuels, or we're supposed to be. We're moving in offices to hybrid working, from using a computer in the way you do every day to artificial intelligence. And in some offices in the US, from plastic straws and paper straws back to plastic straws. Well, Sipiwe Moyo is an organizational behavioral specialist. Sipiwe, good evening. Good to talk to you again. I mean, the volume of noise at the moment, very intense. It's coming from lots of different sort of sources, lots of different speakers generating that noise. How do you turn down the volume?
Yeah, Stephen, it's just a bumpy start to the year. It's just incredible the amount of noise we are seeing right now. And I think you're right. It's not about ignoring the world. It's about training our brain to focus on what truly matters. And I think this is the time when we really, really need leadership, because I think what we want to try and do is just to control our cognitive load in terms of just manage to prioritize what we listen to, prioritize what our team's listening to. And I think from a personal point of view, it's also about just the idea of self-regulation, just being able to regulate the kind of things you listen to and so on. Because without it, unfortunately, we are going to suffer with workplaces that not only do lack focus, but unfortunately there comes a point where all the noises outside the external environment infiltrate the workplace, and whatever we've worked so hard in the last 5 years, 10 years, the political uncertainty, the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing now, if we're not careful, they're going to spill over to the workplace, and you're going to have a workplace that is just tense as opposed to being focused on what you're supposed to do.
How do you make your workplace quite calm? I mean, it's tempting to say if you've got 24-hour news channels on the wall, switch them off, you know, but I think a lot of people are quite used to them. I mean, are there ways you can make your workspaces a little calmer?
There are. And I mean, it's just the idea of understanding what is it that helps our nervous system and what doesn't. And I think it's one of those times where we really need to think about our experts and who create environments that are calm. So if you're having your 24-hour news channel all the time in all your office space, that's probably not the greatest idea to have now. Beautiful music that calms our nervous system, communicating the bigger picture of the organization on the TV once in a while. So you can switch to news, but who said you should have the news on TV for the whole day? So it's probably some time now we have to alternate that, play a bit of music, play a bit of our CEO talking about the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve, and also just the idea of helping employees control what they can. But you're not helping employees control what they can if you are feeding you are feeding this insatiable desire to just keep watching the news. And it's not really about creating false promises. It's not really about shutting down the noise completely, but it's about just helping us as employees manage this cognitive load that we are facing now. Because I don't think we were made to listen to so much noise. It does not help with workplace clarity. It does not encourage team-wide prioritization. It doesn't prioritize teamwork. So if you look at some of the divisive things that are happening out there, if we bring them back into the workplace, it's not going to help us at all.
I mean, I think maybe not so much here, actually, but in the US, to manage a workplace where that country is so divided between two distinct camps, here things are much more complicated, much more diverse, and you might disagree with someone on one thing but agree with them on something else. In the US, it seems politics has been become so fundamental, quite difficult to actually manage that workplace.
And that's why, Stephen, I think you've made such a great point. That's why we must actually hold on to our diversity and our options. The more we try to force people to either or, what we're trying to do is to bring the entire challenge that the US is having, where you have to choose whether you're blue or red, and people will speak to you based on whether you are blue or red. And I think we have a lot of options, and we have to make sure that all this external noise does not filter into our workplace, and that we do not allow things that are happening in the US and in the global environment to infiltrate what we're doing here, and not allow some of the conversations that are supposedly happening there, in which South Africa is doing much better at some of the things that the US is arguing about. We are not supposed to bring those things here. We are doing far better in some of the things that the US is struggling with right now. There is absolutely no reason for us to heighten our anxiety, to heighten our stress, which will lead to a lack of focus and a drop of productivity by allowing all these things that are happening in the US as if, taking them as if they are our issues when they are not.
So many organizations talk about resilience, and Sapio, I've become a little cynical about this. I mean, I feel that when a company says we want resilience, what they actually want is for us to do more with less, frankly. But resilience is something we can't ignore, and I can see why it's a buzzword, because what you're talking about is surviving the noise and the consequences of the noise.
Yes, absolutely. We need resilience. But I think also, as young people would say, resilience have a bad reputation, a bad rep, in a sense that it's not really about skirting around reality and not facing reality head on. It's not about not giving resources. There's a certain point where you cannot ask people to do more without giving them resources. So it's not really about that. It's just the idea of making sure that we use our relationships at work as a proper social support. One of the anchors and the keys of resilience is to have positive relationships and social support in the workplace. When things are tough, Stephen, how we relate to each other will determine whether we're going to weather that storm or not. So a key element of resilience that is needed in these uncertain times is our relationships at work, because human beings can handle workload better than they can handle negative relationships. So it's one of those times where we have to be so jealous about our relationships. It's one of those times where our relationships are actually going to help us counter some of the stress and the noise and help with our mental well-being. So it's not resilience in a sense that we shouldn't be given resources, but it's about the social support. It's about the relationships that we have that will transcend these tough times.
Should you be talking about the noise, or should you be kind of saying, in this place, we don't talk about the noise, do you bring, and I mean, one of the things I've learned about working in South Africa is that you cannot exclude, you cannot stop everything that's happening in society from coming into the workplace. It absolutely will be there because it affects the people who you work with. So you do need to manage that a little bit too.
Yeah, it's such a tricky balance, Stephen. But interestingly, silence also creates more anxiety. So I think if there's so much noise in the external environment, what leaders are supposed to do are supposed to filter the noise and decide what are some of the things that we need in the workplace in order for us to just communicate what you can, be transparent even in things that you can't communicate. So, for example, if you feel like all the tensions and the conflicts that are happening in the external environment, our policy is not to address them, one of the things that you need to try and do in your town hall is to explain and communicate and what can and what can't we do. So just silence by itself creates more anxiety. But when we communicate, we choose to communicate on things that we can control. We choose to communicate on things that do not increase the stress level of employees. The best leaders lead with honesty, but with direction and care. So it's about we care for you, but we are going to reframe the entire noise. We are not going to be caught up into the noise. Yes, we can't avoid it. Yes, we're not going to skate around reality, but our job is to do this, and we're going to focus on what we can control. So it's also just a little bit of acknowledging so that we don't look like we exist in a vacuum as if we are contextual. But it's about what you do with that context. There's no need for you to go deep on the context, acknowledge, but reframe towards something that really unites us, which is the bigger picture of what we're trying to do, which is to focus on what we can control and to focus on things that engage us, that reduce cynicism and our goals. So that little acknowledgement creates a little bit of certainty. Then we can focus on things that matter, like our goals, our workplace relationships, which will help reduce the tension and misalignment.
Sipiwe Moyo, thank you so much. Good to hear from you. Organizational behavior specialist.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Well, I don't know if this has happened to you, if it's happened to someone you know, someone you work with, a situation where they get a call from someone and the person says, would you like to buy a sort of litre, maybe 2 litres, maybe 5 litres of cleaning material? Not a big thing. And suddenly it turns into a big thing because you keep getting the stuff, you keep getting billed for it. You're told it was a pre-order, and in fact, you've now agreed in some way that you now have to keep paying for it. This is something Wendy Nola's been looking at, your Consumer Ninja. It'd be interesting to hear from you as well on this, on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567, as to whether or not this has actually happened to you. It'd be very interesting to hear if you've had this kind of thing. And my understanding is that it's beginning to happen more and more often, and that is something that we really do need to sort of try and understand how it does happen. As I understand it, these calls normally are supposed to be recorded, but often aren't. Wendy Nola, good evening. You've got a couple of examples of where this has happened, where suddenly people find that it's claimed that they've agreed to buy huge amounts of cleaning liquid. What happened?
Hi, Stephen. Yeah, it's a boring one, and I get a steady stream of complaints about it, and people really get into trouble with their employers around it. So companies call up small businesses, schools, that kind of company, and spin them a story about we want you to try our wonderful new cleaning materials. They're very concentrated, they're very effective, better than anything else on the market. Sometimes it's printer cartridges, and then they fudge the issue and of how much they're going to get and what it's going to cost by sort of. The script is very clever, and it talks somewhere about 25 litres, but then it starts talking about the price per 100 litres, and then there's samples sometimes in the mix and vouchers. And anyway, the person says, well, yeah, okay. And they're not in any sort of managerial capacity usually. And then this huge order comes. It's usually about 50 litres, 225 litres of detergents or degreasers or whatever. And then what's worse is sometimes those people kind of pay for it themselves because that the company or the school says, we haven't authorized this, we don't need this. And then 3 months later, another order, 50 litres of more cleaner. And so it goes. And it's causing huge drama. So the case study I have today, Stephen, is a woman I'll call Sally. She works for a transport company in KZN. She did just that. She agreed to this initial order, not quite realizing what she was letting herself in for. So these 50 litres, 2 different products were delivered, followed by an invoice of 6,200 Rand. The invoice never comes with the products because according to the legislation, you have a cooling off period of a week if you order something as a result of direct marketing, right? So the invoice only comes later when the cooling off period's gone. And she was subjected to relentless demand for payment, and eventually she borrowed money from a family member. Can you believe it? Plus, she received a warning, a final warning, if you don't mind, from her employer, who said you had no right to authorize that.
Okay, but Wendy, just hold on. I mean, this is all a phone call. So what proof do they have that you actually ordered the stuff?
Okay, yeah. So, well, this is the crux of it, because the reason she came to me, did Sally, last week, was that 3 months later, she thought that was over. That was in October end of January, another 50 litres gets delivered, and another demand for payment of 14,000. Her boss was threatening to literally fire her. So I get hold of the company. The company in this case was Raw Chemicals International, based in Randburg. There are many of them. I don't know if they're connected at all. Anyway, I said just that. Where is the call recording or anything that proves that she agreed to multiple orders? Because according to the Act, if there isn't proof of that, it's unsolicited and you can actually keep it if they don't come and collect it.
Wow.
So yeah, good news was that I got a response saying that there was a misunderstanding. We endeavored to keep our clients happy. We will arrange for the collection of the 4 drums and have the account credited. And we will dispatch a courier to do the collection in the next 48 hours. So at least there's some reprieve for poor Sally, who, as I say, was on the point of collapse.
Sure, but I mean, without a call recording, I mean, doesn't the whole thing just fall apart?
Well, exactly. So I went back to the woman at Raw Chemicals, the general manager, to say, thanks very much, but please answer my question about the call recording. Is there a call recording underpinning your demands? Her answer was, we've done a preliminary investigation and we found that company procedure has not been followed, hence the agreement to collect the product from the client. This has been arranged, and an internal investigation will happen. So there's a lot of bullying that goes on, and without a call recording, this is what people must absolutely know, other than don't engage with these people, because it's all smoke and mirrors, the way they talk about the price and the quantity and everything else. Just disengage. Do not, if they use the word sample, just still say, thank you, we're happy with our current contracts. Just say no, because, as I say, I get a steady stream of these, and these are sort of often entry-level workers whose lives are literally turned upside down, and their relationships with their employers are threatened. And as I say, there's certainly, some of them have to be the first order because they agreed, right?
Yeah.
But then the ones that come every 3 months, and they're running into many thousands, if there's no recording that has you agreeing, them saying this is the first of 5 orders or whatever, and has them agreeing yes and to the price, then there's no legal basis that you must just ignore them. Yeah.
And keep the stuff.
Well, you can keep the stuff if you tell them this was unsolicited.
Yes.
And they don't come to collect it. It's in the Act. I can give whoever wants to know the reference. And they get to keep these chemicals. So yeah, that is the delicious part. But believe you me, they collect them.
Yeah, Wendy Nola, thank you very much indeed. Your consumer ninja. I do appreciate it. A very, very scary story. It does seem to be happening quite a lot. And in the end, boils down to bullying.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Well, from time to time, you'll hear a story about someone who was doing quite nicely in their chosen field, chucked it all in, and went to doing something completely different. This is the first time I've ever heard of someone who was working as an international relations analyst for government and chucked it all in to become a beekeeper, and has done so incredibly successfully. Makgadi Mabela is the founder and CEO at Native Norsi. Makgadi, good evening. Thanks so much for your time this evening.
Evening, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you? Are you allowed? I mean, I presume bees go to sleep at this time, right? Otherwise, you would probably have to be spending some time with them.
Of course, they go to sleep.
So you're working for government. It's an interesting job, the Foreign Affairs Department. Why did you decide to chuck that in and go and work with bees instead?
I didn't decide to chuck it in. It was just a natural progression for me because it is something that my father had been doing all my life. He'd been a beekeeper, and I grew up obviously observing him without any real intention to chuck my life and join him. But because I only realized once I had grown up, the important work that he was actually doing, because all my life it was just about having access to the best honey and just, being spoiled in that way. I didn't know that it played such a critical role in our ecosystem and in the biodiversity of humans and animals.
Okay, you had to start your business. You would have to get your first hive. Having a dad in the game, did that help? I mean, you have to start somewhere.
It kind of helped, but not really. He's such a pessimist. He didn't believe that I was actually serious about beekeeping. And also because my father has no sons, I am the first of 3 daughters. And in the African world, men do not grow to think that women or daughters can actually come in and take over their legacy. It's always, presumed that once a daughter leaves the home for marriage, she's never going to come back. So it took a lot of convincing, but at least I had him as, a bouncing ball. We were always geographically placed in different areas. He's based in Limpopo. I was based in Gauteng. So I had to go to, a beekeeping school and learn, the basics, because he wasn't there to teach me the material stuff and the theory behind what he did. But it did help that if I'm stuck and I don't understand anything, I can just call him and tell him that, oh my gosh, my honey looks funny. Did I do something wrong? Or my hive is, the bees are flying all over. Is there something, that I have to look out for? So it definitely helped in that way, but I still had to do the groundwork.
Okay, so you go to beekeeping school. How did you start after that? I mean, you need to start with a sort of stock. You need to start with some bees.
Yes, so initially I used to... I realized that I tasted honey from someone because I knew honey, and I saw that they had honey when I was making tea, and I asked if I could use them. Then I realized that no, there's something very different between what this person has just shared with me versus what I grew up having. I didn't know about all the honey fraud and stuff that's happening to a lot of honey we find on our commercial shelves. So I offered to bring some of my father's honey and, just make them aware why I was saying it was so different. And that just kind of snowballed, more people started wanting the honey. Then I started not only taking my father's honey and selling it, I started, putting a markup. And then that's how I started making a little bit of money from his honey. And then after I went to beekeeping school, I then bought a beehive and then, started teaching myself. And when I realized that I needed more beehives to make more honey, then I partnered with the People's Fund for a crowdfunding campaign, and they helped me to crowdfund for the beehives that I started my business with.
Okay, so I mean, I live in a house with another adult, my partner, children. Well, my wife, 2 children, 2 dogs and 3 cats. And dogs and cats are relatively easy, but a beehive is a complex thing. Lots of organisms. They need to be looked after. They need to be managed. You have queens. I've never really understood the entire system. It seems a bit complicated to me. And it must be quite a thing to sort of be responsible for in a way. I realize bees are responsible for themselves, but it's quite a thing to manage. I just thinking about it makes me feel quite daunted.
I think if you knew how to manage a beehive, you probably would feel like taking care of dogs and cats is probably more daunting because bees are quite independent. So when there is a way that you attract them to a hive. A lot of it is natural, but there are things that you can actually do to encourage them to come and occupy a beehive. And once they're there, you leave them to establish a colony. So a lot of beekeepers, our job is to just monitor the beehive to find out if, the bees are building the comb in a healthy way. And that does not take a lot of your time. I think once a week, just to inspect a beehive is sufficient, just to understand, how well your beehive is going. And you harvest, depending on the season, it could be anything between 2 months and I don't know how long. It all depends on factors like how much food they have access to, the seasons, the locations, and all of that. So when you do harvest, then it will be in intervals of 2 months to say 6 months. But it really is not, especially if you're not managing a lot of beehives, it's not a lot of time that you need for you to actually manage an active beehive.
How do you attract them? I mean, in my head, I have this idea that you have to take a queen bee and take the queen. I don't know how you do that. And that will attract them. Do you do something else?
Yes. So you can actually, so when you have a beehive, there's two main components that you get from this beehive. It's going to be honey and beeswax. So when you start a new hive, you can, number one, take beeswax and then line them on the beehive itself inside. And the bees are very familiar with the smell of beeswax, so they would be likely to be attracted to the beehive. There's also, you can also just take a cotton swab and then place a few drops of lemongrass. Lemongrass has few smells that are familiar to bees because apparently they smell like the pheromones of bees. And then you can just place it in the corner of the hive. That is also likely to encourage bees to come and occupy the hive. Of course, there are other things that you have to do, like ensure that when you do that, it's the spring or the summertime, because that is when bees are most active and likely to be looking for a home. They're moving from one area to another. And you need to make sure that it's placed in an area where there's not a lot of, distractions, and the bees are likely to be comfortable when they get there. That's why in the absence of beehives, they'll occupy things like tree trunks and occupy things like the ceiling or the roof or tunnels, especially in big industrial organizations. They just want a space that is nice and cozy with little to no interferences, and then they're happy to occupy that place.
So then, this is a silly question. You talk about harvesting the honey. I presume if you don't harvest the honey, it doesn't matter. They just go on producing. We seem to have lost Makgadi Mabela, the founder and CEO of Native Norsi, and just continuing that conversation with her about her life as a beekeeper. It's a fascinating business.
The Money Show.
Shapeshifters.
Makgadi Mabela, the founder and CEO of Native Norsi, your shapeshifter this evening. Makgadi, sorry about that. Dare I say a little bit of a buzz or a little bit of a hum on the line there. Sorry about that.
Yes, I'm back, and I don't know if you want me to continue about your question on the honey.
Yeah,
if
sure.
You don't harvest, then
if you don't harvest, what happens? Do they just keep producing as much as they would anyway?
Yes. So the bees make honey for themselves. And in a beehive, you have two components. You have the brood chamber, which I normally like referring to as the manufacturing hub. That is where they store their eggs. They store the small bees, and they nurse their bees. They store the pollen, and they store the royal jelly and all of that, and then they make some honey. And once that production house is done and it's working effectively, then they start making reserve honey, which they then place in the second layer of the beehive, which we call the super. In the super, they will then make this honey. And then if that super is full, as a responsible beekeeper, you put another layer, which is another super. And depending on you as a beekeeper, you can continue to just put more supers or harvest. So what we do as beekeepers is that in the summer months where there is a high nectar flow, so this means that the bees have access to lots of food through the flowers and the trees that are all flowering because it is a high nectar season, then the bees have enough honey to make for both us and them. So you can harvest without endangering the beehive and making them run out of food supply. And that's what we humans will then consume. During the winter months or in seasons where there's a drought or there's not enough food like the winter, then responsible beekeepers do not harvest that honey because they understand that this is the honey that the bees are going to use in the event that they do not have access to food through active plants and flowers, as would happen during droughts or winter months. So that is how it actually works. They make it for themselves, but it's enough for both of us until the season is not quite right. Then we leave the beehives for the bees to enjoy all the produce.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And every bee, I mean, all bees around the world, they use the same system? They all do their hives in the same way?
I'm not sure about all over the world, but I do know that honeybees are very similar throughout the world. In South Africa, we have two types of bees. We've got the Cape honeybee, which is called the capensis, and we have the African bee, which is called the scutellata. So this is the honey in the northern parts of South Africa. And both of them behave in a similar way from a honey production point of view. And in this way, we are able to then see these patterns being replicated. It is throughout most of Africa. And because I haven't really visited, some of the Asian bees and some of the bees from America, I, as far as I am now, know that a lot of these honeybees behave the same. But then obviously, they will differ in terms of the physical makeup. Some of them are smaller, some of them are bigger, some of them are more aggressive, like the African honeybee that we have in South Africa. It's one of the most aggressive types of bees. Some of them are less aggressive. So I know behaviorally and structurally they do differ, but from a honey production point of view, there are similarities.
What's it like from an industry point of view? So I know if you go to the shelves of of some retailers, you'll see lots of different types of honey, and I'm always sort of amazed at that because honey is honey, except that honey, as you've pointed out, is not always just honey. Some are better than others.
Yes.
How do you compete against other people? Is there quite a lot of competition in the market?
So from the different perspectives. So from a commercial perspective, where you're going to your main retail stores, there is a lot of imported honey because South Africa is importing more honey than it actually makes. And this imported honey is acquired at a very, very cheap price because of different factors that, affect those countries. Some of them, they don't naturally produce this honey like we do in South Africa. Some of them, there's a lot of additives that they add to the honey that makes up, all those volumes, those crazy volumes that we then import as a country. And as a result, the price ends up being extremely low, and it makes it difficult for South African beekeepers because a lot of us are still making honey in the natural way, fully relying on nature and fully relying on nature's timeline. So our overheads are much higher, and as a result, our honey is premium. And for a premium, you must pay a bit more than what you would if you're not getting a premium product. And as a result, South African honey producers end up not being able to beat the price that is currently being used to sell honey at retail stores. So depending on how you look at it, you can create your own market, like what we tried to do by opening our own online store and shop, and then find your clients who are actually looking for, the genuine honey South African product. And you can also then, sell at alternative markets where it's more a specialized industry. So a lot of, health markets are growing, a lot of specialized industries like confectionaries and a lot of health stores, a lot of people who are looking at, living a better life, indigenous products. Those those kind of specialty stores are more likely to look for the kind of product that we are actually selling. And we then try to concentrate our efforts in attracting those kind of markets. And there's a lot of conscious buying, even from corporates where they want to gift responsibly. That's where we will come in and we'll pitch that, consider supporting a beekeeper for, your Women's Day products, your year-end products, your corporate gifting. So those kind of things, it's just about the perspective for you to shift and not only look at, the retail stores as the only viable market, which is, what a lot of us want, but it's not always possible if you're going to sell a product like honey that is 100% South African, unadulterated or raw. You want to be able to sell it to people who are going to appreciate it, so you can be able to do it sustainably.
And Mokgadi, do you find, are there many other women beekeepers? Are you still often at any kind of industry convention the only one?
I'm not the only one. When I did, start, coming out and starting Native Nose, I think it was around 2015. It was still me, and then soon after that, I identified another lady who had a similar story to mine. Unlike her father, it was her grandfather who used to do beekeeping, and she had started a company. But I think, over the years, I'm seeing more and more female beekeepers popping up. Some are not doing it at a commercial scale. They're just doing it at home. Maybe they've started a homestead. Some are doing it as a secondary business where they're buying honey from, honey producers or beekeepers and selling it. Some are making tertiary products from it, like hand creams and lotions and all of that. So there is definitely a growth. It's not as strong as it should be, but I'm glad to see that, I'm no longer seeing myself as the only one. I am identifying other female beekeepers who are doing amazing things, and I love it for all of us because there is space for women beekeepers in the industry.
This is going to be a very strange question. When I hear bees humming, I kind of just think those are bees. I presume when you hear bees, you can almost tell without even looking what kind of state those bees are in, whether they're just going about their daily stuff, making honey and royal jelly, or whether they're actually quite angry or if there's a problem in the hive.
So I experience bees in two ways. I experience bees when I go to the beehive, and depending on what I'm doing, whether I'm harvesting or just doing a hive inspection, I'm able to sense the temperament. So the longer you are at a beehive, the more the bees get agitated, the more they're not happy with you being there, tampering with that beehive. And obviously the mood is different. And then I also then experience bees just like you or anyone else, where I'm going about my day and a beehive just comes and buzzes past my ear or lands on my hand. It does eventually land on my hand because I'm not going to shoo it away. I normally just leave it to do what it does, and then it goes on its way. So normally when it's just an everyday me and the bee comes along, I'm quite calm and I let it just do its thing, and eventually it does leave. So in those instances, a lot of the time the bee is not angry. So when I'm sitting with other people who are obviously not as relaxed around bees as I am, then it gets a bit chaotic because they're trying to get as far away as possible, and they probably end up agitating it by trying to shoo it away, which just makes the bee feel upset, and then it's likely to sting.
Do you see bees as friends? This is such a silly question. But do you see them as kind of our friends? They give us honey and we give them, just trouble in return, really.
In a way, I see them as a means to an end for human survival. I see them as a critical element to our environment holistically. I see them as friends as well. And I see them mostly as family because, as I said, this is a family legacy. It's not something that I just do for fun. It is something that, has a greater purpose for me and my family. So I see it as a continuation or a string between what my grandfather did and what he passed down to my dad, and what my dad is doing and what he's passing down to me, and what I'll hopefully pass on to my family and my children or my grandchildren one day. So that's how I see it. I see it as the common thread through the different generations of my family that has kept us together. So that's how I see bees.
I was going to ask if you were thinking of passing this down. This is something you want to continue. I mean, and people will be able to say my great-grandparent and my great-great-grandparent were involved in something I do. And bees are always going to be with us. Well, I hope so.
So what I don't do is try to force it down my kids' throat. They're still young. I've got 2 girls. One is 6, one is 10. I just try to make them understand that bees are not an enemy. Bees are good for the environment. We are enjoying the honey in the home because bees were friendly enough to share what they did with us. So I'm trying to just build a positive image around bees and what their mom does and how they should actually view and respect bees. And it would be great for them to, continue the business or, carry the legacy over, whether it is at a commercial, a global rate, or just for them to have a hive in their farm or in their yard so that they can always be able to, contribute positively towards the environment. But I'm certainly not going to, force them to take over my legacy. I think I'm going to afford them the opportunity that I had where I naturally just, transitioned into beekeeping. And if they want to do that, welcome. If not, and they still have a love for bees, I'm still also happy with that.
Mokgadi, I've learned so much from you over the last half an hour. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. Your shapeshifter this evening, Mokgadi Mabela, the founder and CEO at Native Nosi, a beekeeper